And because we do have Dr. Nasiani and the cabinet and I believe our district clerk are in the boardroom, Dr. Gianni, if you could lead us in the pledge.
I will. You ready? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God,
indivisible,
with
liberty
and justice for all.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I think that you and the cabinet and the district clerk know about the emergency evacuation and meeting procedures.
We do.
And you probably don't need to have those repeated. So now we're going to move on to the board consent agenda, where I'll need a motion to approve items C1 through C3. Is there a motion? Mr. Nix, a second by
Ms. Aruda.
And any questions or discussions on these items? Seeing none, all in favor, raise your hand. I see all hands were raised. It's unanimously approved. Since we're doing the meeting remotely, we do not have the public present in the boardroom, and we will skip the guide to board meetings and go right into the superintendent's report.
Yes, thank you. And my report will revolve around school closure as a result of COVID-19. And I think I will begin with school closure because many have asked me how long the school closure will be. And I wish I could answer that with some degree of certainty, but I cannot. What I can say is that Governor Cuomo indicated he will continue to review the data, extend closures in 2-week increments if need be. And he has also indicated that his decisions will be regional, including the tri-state. Data provided by the governor suggests the curve is flattening, and I'm sure many of you are watching the same broadcast I am. The governor also reported on Sunday a gradual opening of New York State, and yesterday he indicated that an announcement will be made regarding schools at the end of this week. So not sure what that means. I believe it will address school closure because those comments came in his response to a question on opening up the economy and how schools need to be tied to that. He indicated that upstate regions likely will reopen first, then downstate. In fact, in one of his conferences, he mentioned that Nassau, Suffolk, the city, and Westchester, and even Jersey needed to be looked at as a whole with regard to reopening. Phase 1 will start sometime after May 15th, which includes construction, manufacturing businesses that operate with low risk, followed by a 2-week assessment period. And then phase 2 would be other businesses, and schools too can be included in that phase 2. So, I mean, my guesstimate from listening to him is May 15th, some upstate schools will begin this phase 1, and 2 weeks after, schools may follow upstate, not necessarily here by us. Mr. Pacini?
Yeah, 2 quick questions. Do you think we'll be able to put a plan in place for, there's going to be some parents who aren't going to send their kids if we open back up.
Right.
So do we know, I mean, are we asking and exploring the fact that can the digital or the distance learning take place instead of being physically in school is number 1. Number 2 is my guess, based on what I've read through some of his comments, is that, you know, I'm guessing the governor this week is going to put it on districts to submit a plan for social distancing for the remainder of the school year if we're in place. So are we looking at right now, some ideas, or are we kind of vetting that through proactively to see what school will look like if we're in session in June?
Yeah, so we've talked about it, we've ordered masks. We are planning to do some barriers at entrances and in offices, but I gotta be honest with you, I listened to the governor, and I think it was a couple of weeks ago when he said he is going to look for two things from schools: protocols on disinfecting and cleaning, which I think we are up to snuff with, and protocols on social distancing. I don't know how we can appropriately social distance on a bus, in the hallways, or in the cafeteria. Honestly, I don't know. So I think it's gonna be a challenge.
One of the things that in between that I'm reading through some of the conversations I have through the NISBA forums and the National Suffolk School Board, my conversations with neighboring administrators and board members, it seems to think that there will be a scenario, or possibly a scenario, of alternating days of instruction, possibly AM and PM schedules. You can reduce the amount of people in the school. Logistically, my fear is they're gonna say alternating days, AM, PM, you have a quarter of your population in the buildings. Problem with that is always gonna be busing, and
Busing,
but that's gonna do it.
but also, does that address the childcare need that we're so?
No, it does, it does a
It
little
doesn't.
bit, but not completely, so.
Yeah, so no, we've been thinking about it and trying to plan for, protections for our folks. But in terms of social distancing, I'm not really sure how we would do that. I mean, we certainly cannot separate our classroom desks by 6 feet. It's impossible. And the only way to maybe do it is to reduce by half. And again, that'll bring, I'm sure, contractual issues, childcare issues, and a number of issues. I'm anxious to hear what the governor says. My gut tells me we're not coming back this school year. Not given our close proximity to Nassau and the city and Westchester. But that's my gut. Every time I listen to him, then I hear, then maybe we are opening. So it's a tough call to make. I'm hoping, at the end of the week, he gives us some crystal clear guidance, or at least decisions with regard to how things are going to be, and then we can plan appropriately after that. But again, I don't know how we would social distance with all the kids in the building. So, any other comments on that? That's all I have on the closure. Just briefly about remote learning. The board does know we've been up and running since March 13th with access to our instructional material remotely. Our teachers have been introducing instructional material remotely through the website and our continuity of learning plan. New material began through Google's Classroom and a variety of other technologies for the past 2 weeks. K-2 teachers began moving to the Google Classroom platform this week. In fact, some even sooner than that. And we expect, we're currently also exploring how we may modify the grading right now for our kids K-12, because obviously we have a new normal with regard to what's going on and the lack of face-to-face instruction. Our administrators have been meeting. I saw a draft plan earlier today, and we do expect to have a modified plan for grading K-12 by the end of this week, and able to share it with faculty and as well as our parents. And our goal in any grading plan is not to hurt students as a result of the closure, okay? But also to make sure that they take the work meaningful as well, so they just don't fluff it off. Our top priority continues to be connecting the unconnected. We are continuing, of course, concerned about families who do not have devices or internet access. As we make connections to these families, it is difficult. We should have a really good handle at the end of this week, and I'm hoping even by tomorrow I'll be able to give you some pretty good numbers, because we began that connection check-in to Google Classrooms last week. So this week we're collecting the data. I think I shared some percentages with you last week. I think those percentages are pretty good, but certainly not where we want to be. And while teachers are reaching out, we'll be approaching that level where we have to start making some other connections. And we've even discussed about home visits for some families. In fact, we are planning for our parent liaison to do some home visits with some of the youngsters we can't reach out to at this point. And I think Mr. Bacini was first, and then I'll go.
Are we gonna be able to determine through our efforts thus far, and once you compile that data on students that, we're not connecting with, how much of that is, say, a connectivity or an equipment issue versus a reluctance issue?
Yeah, so once we know who they are, my plan is to assign some staff to making that determination and connecting with those people. I'll give you an example, which, it's not an example to your question, but earlier today, in speaking with Mr. Hogan, he indicated that 100% of the kids have been connected to. Okay, that's a great number, right? But I think what we need to keep in mind in that one-time connection, does that mean all children have access to be able to do the schoolwork throughout the time? So I'll give you a pretty good example, and Mr. Pacini, your family's a good example. You have 2 people at home working remotely, and 3 children at home learning remotely. I don't know how many devices you have, but to have 2 or 3 devices, I would say is an average for a family like yours. So 2 people aren't working sometime during the day, okay? And that's probably an average household. So imagine a household where there's 1 device and there's no connection, right? So there are challenges beyond what I think everyone's thinking about. So connecting once is nice. We know there's access, but the question is the access good enough or great enough to be able to continue that continuity of learning? So that's an issue that we struggle with. I think I see Mr. Park.
Yeah, hi. So I'm a little disappointed that we waited so long before we really reached out to all of the kids, in particular ones that we know there may be a problem in terms of internet service. I think the schools are responsible for reaching out to those kids, and even in some cases helping them find that internet service that was apparently available all the time. Now, after speaking with a couple of our teachers, I did get some good news. However, I would like, you said you were going to have more information by the weekend. I would certainly really appreciate that information. And in terms of reaching out to those kids who maybe, now all of our kids do have Chromebooks, don't they?
No, they don't.
Oh, they don't?
No,
They're available.
we have Chromebooks available for those who need. We have enough Chromebooks to put in the hand of every child grades 3 through 12. However, because we charge on something called COWs, or docking stations in schools, we don't have chargers. We don't have that many chargers. So we had about 1,000 chargers to start. We've actually come across probably another 300 to 500 and are purchasing some more. I believe we have about 800 Chromebooks currently distributed. They're still being requested with the rollout of the K-2 classes. Now the K-2 families are requesting them, but we still have access to chargers and are still able to. We haven't had to tell anyone no yet that's in need.
So we don't know, is what you're saying, how many students don't have the Chromebooks? And how are we gonna help those
No.
kids who have fallen behind now because it's been a month?
Yeah.
Wouldn't know, I mean, that's, some kids are just not gonna make it. Are we prepared to deal with this?
Well, we're going to have to be prepared to deal with it, and I
Yeah,
want to speak to your disappointment about reaching out, because we did everything we could to reach out, and yes, it was certainly in phases, and you know as much as far as stuffing grabbing goes. Unfortunately, not being able to see who actually connects on the internet, it was a problem, and we were relying simply on that contact with the teacher. That's why we changed our system, so kids had to check in. And that's why I tell you, I can give you better information. Quite frankly, if kids don't check in, I still won't know if that connection's been made. And those are the folks that phone calls have been made, and phone calls sometimes aren't returned, and we're sending folks out to knock on doors.
Well, see, I agree with you there, but I think the kids who don't check in, the teacher knows who those kids are, and the teacher at that point, I believe, should reach out to these kids who are not checking in. And that's the part that bothers me.
And
I think they make a more effort to reach these kids.
And Mr. Parker, I believe that has occurred, but, you know, this remote learning, evolved. It started with a continuity of learning where it was just to maintain work because it was a shorter closure. As the closure extended is when new material started to be introduced and when we actually began to start stepping up, us as in other districts, in terms of connecting with these kids. At this point, absent the connection form, the only way teachers knew kids were connected was whether they spoke with them or work was turned in. Because the platform we use, Google Classroom, doesn't give you somebody was there, so to speak. Kids can go in, get the work, but we won't know they got the work until they return the work. That's why we created this check-in. So we've been working on those connections. The problem is we don't know who's been there or not.
And if I may, on that subject, from the teachers I've talked to and from what I've experienced from my kids' teachers, I've seen a lot of teachers reaching out prior to there being a formalized process that Dr. County's talking about, looking for students that, even at the high school level, just some of the, each vice assistant principal has, an all class page that they're pushing out announcements and encouraging things. So I'm seeing a lot of people reaching out. Connectivity is obviously an issue, and reluctance is the other. Because I'm talking to people and they're like, listen, I'm calling kids, twice a week, and parents aren't responding, and who knows what their situation is. Maybe they're both healthcare workers, and there's a million different things, or maybe it's economics. Who knows?
But I started off by saying that there are some positive things going on. We get some excellent teachers, that's clear. But let's move away from that. Let's go to the kids who are not reaching out, to the parents who are not reaching out. We have social workers. Are they trying to contact these people? And I like what you said, Dr. Yanni, about going forward. Okay, so we really have to make an effort to do that, because if we don't hear from these kids by the end of the year, it's heartbreaking. I can't even imagine what these kids or what these homes are going through. And some of these parents, you have a single parent at home
Yeah.
with 3 or 4 kids. So apparently this parent is not home at all. He or she is working all day. And if the kids are not doing what they're supposed to do, or hanging out, playing dice or whatever, so if the student is not checking in, so I think at one point, you know, the school should be responsible for reaching out to these kids and say, hey, look, what's going on? And I like the way you said you're going forward, maybe knocking on doors or doing whatever. We have to do what we have to do, but we can't allow this to just not go forward in a positive way.
Oh, agreed, and listen, as I said, connecting the unconnected is our number one priority. I shared that with the faculty last week when I met with them. I'm going to share that again, and I impressed upon them that was the number one priority of the board as well, was making that connection. And listen, don't be discouraged by the percentages you saw last week, because it could be better than that too, right? Because we didn't have a system in place. So folks could have been, or kids could have been checking in, but we just didn't know about it.
So my question is, when you discover that a kid isn't responding because he doesn't have the access, but wants to, just doesn't have the access, what do we do at that point?
We are going to help families connect with Altice to make that connection. And if that's not going to be possible, then we have paper packets. We have hard copy work. And I know for a fact right now that hard copy work is being delivered to homes and being picked up at the secondary level. Delivered and picked up for folks that don't have access. And we will make sure that you have access to instruction, whether it's digital or hard copy. My concerns will be, and Mr. Parker, you mentioned it, you know, parents that are working or not at home, you know, so we're not picking up the phone. When we go knock on the door, somebody might not be home, right? So that'll be another challenge that we will have. But hopefully by the end of this week, we will have a list of those families that we need to knock on those doors and make those phone calls.
Okay.
Okay.
Couple,
Yes, go ahead.
Go ahead.
a couple of quick things. One, coming from both sides, both the teacher side and from the parent side, this is probably the hardest thing that a teacher and parent both has to go through. The days are extremely long. From the teacher's point of view, I can attest to being a teacher and knowing the teachers here at South Country and connecting with them. They're working 12 to 14 hours a day, connecting with their students, returning phone calls, returning emails. So it's been a lot on everybody, and to that end, I know that they're not going to give up. From the parents' point of view, it does become very trying. Many of our parents, as you said, are working. Some of the things that we might want to think about for those families that we are providing the daycare to, maybe we can think about providing some additional Chromebooks there so that they can work while they are in the daycare center. So that's something that, you know, we might want to think about doing. What I'm finding from my end is parents are working all day long. If their children are being cared for in, say, a step daycare like that, they're not given the opportunities to work there, and then the parents have to work with them when they get home. So I don't know if that's happening here, but it's definitely something.
We're actually, Mr. Ruda, we don't have any youngsters utilizing the free daycare yet.
Okay. And then my second point to that is, once we do gather the data, I'd like to see if many of these children that are not connecting are our Spanish-speaking families. And I know that I speak about this quite often, but I do want to make sure that we are reaching our Spanish-speaking families. I know a lot goes out through email, but I also know that many newcomers to the country, the parents do not know how to read, both in English or in Spanish. So my concern is always, are we getting the information out to our Spanish-speaking families? And lastly, once we look at the attendance, one of the things that I noticed, is that at the secondary level, what ends up happening is as the teachers post assignments, your attendance login goes further and further down. I know my own children alone, there's plenty of times they've finished up assignments, they're done for the day, they get up in the morning, they're like, I forgot to assign my attendance. I don't know if there's another way to do that. I know, Mr.
No,
Watson.
we're not doing
Okay.
it, we're not doing attendance.
Well, there's the check-in, they call it attendance, the kids call it attendance, but it's the check-in. But it falls to the bottom as the teachers post assignments. So it's not right there up on the top.
Yeah, so that purpose is just to see who's connected, right? So once we
Right.
have that data, then that's all we need, right?
So then you're only gonna do it for like a week or two, or is this
Well,
gonna
the
continue?
plan right now is to check in every time you check in, sure. But that, it wasn't for attendance, it was simply to know who
Right.
is connected.
Right, and the point that I'm making is if we are doing where the principals and the APs are creating for the grade level, maybe the check-in can be in their Google Classroom as opposed to one for every single classroom, so that the children aren't all over it and falling down. So for my child alone, we'll say, he has 10 different classes, 11 different classes that he's checking into each time, and they keep falling further and further down.
You
So
see,
as
the
time goes on,
problem.
I don't know if data will be as,
Yeah, the concern I have with taking it out of the teacher's classroom is it takes the teacher out of the connection piece with the family. They are the folks that have the connection with the families, the relationship with the families, and they're the ones that should be able to recognize that. And then on top of that, you have kids that are in 5, 6 classes, right? That doesn't mean one kid's not checking into one class and totally absent on the others. That's why it's vitally important in my mind that it's in the teacher's classroom, not the administrator's classroom. The administrator's classroom was for the purpose of first getting a quick glimpse of who has the ability to connect. And it served that purpose. Now it's who's connecting to remote learning.
I understand, but it becomes just another task for the children, especially at the secondary. That's the point that I'm making. It's not just there right up on top. It's not just a quick thing. Now you're scrolling down 5 or 6 on top of everything else that the children have to do. So from my end, when I'm looking at it, it becomes a tedious task for the students, and then they stress if they forget to check in. So I'm sharing that information with you from my own firsthand experience. I'm seeing it in my own household. They've woken up in the morning and they're like, oh my God, I forgot to check in yesterday. We don't need the additional stress, that's all. That's the point that I'm making for doing 10 different check-ins. That's the point that I'm making, and I'm giving you the information firsthand experience.
Okay, thank you.
So one last comment, that is that, given the way things are right now, do you think that we might eventually go to a virtual teaching situation totally, maybe in the future? So have you guys thought of that?
Let me tell you my feelings. This experience will definitely change teaching and learning. Not necessarily next year, but I think definitely down the road. So it's a little premature to say what it'll do, but I think it will be beneficial down the road for many, particularly kids that may be out for long-term illnesses or whatnot, because there'll be availability of material for that continuity of learning.
If anything, this experience has shown, in my opinion, that face-to-face teaching and learning is more important than anything, and it can't be done digitally. I think to your point, you'll see some changes to technologies. To your point, if somebody is out for whatever reason, I think attendance awards and things like that will be permanently gone after this. But yeah, that face-to-face interaction has proven much more valuable than some people think.
Without a question, but my daughter did receive her doctor's PhD online. She had to be present a couple of times a year, but basically for 2 years she studied online.
Listen, I don't disagree. I think college may go that way, but, you know, your daughter was an adult when she did that. We're dealing with children. That's to me what I think the difference is. You know, it's funny, I had somebody joking around and say, you know, parents are gonna learn, you know, how difficult it is to teach kids, you know, while they're home now. Now you're gonna do it. Well, you know, show me a classroom that has a couch, a flat screen TV, and an Xbox in it, and then it'll be a level playing field. But the distractions at home, especially when the sun's out, is difficult. You know, you know, it's hard, you know, kids are up late and, you know, and sleeping in, so the schedule's a little different, especially those high school kids. Let's just say my son goes to bed right around the time my wife wakes up. So, I mean, this is the lifestyle that's going on right now, so.
I'll change the subject just a little bit, and that's looking down the road to next year and planning that's going to be done to provide so that the students can do any catch-up that they need to do, or have any social, emotional learning issues dealt with. Because I think that this is gonna be, it's a life-changing event, and I think it's a little hard for us to know now how it's going to have affected the students. And the other thing is, particularly for the younger ones, maybe to stay with the same teacher for some period into next year and have, you know, remedial kind of work done until they can all be brought up to have completed what was expected for this year. Have you had even time to come up for breath, Dr. Gianni, to start thinking about these things?
Yeah, not that much breath. But we certainly have considered kids coming back at a less of a level than we had expected. You know, generally when kids come back from summer, their learning needs to be picked up. The question still is whether or not we will be even able to have summer school. But we are not reducing any of our support staff in our projections with a recognition that we need them. I believe, and I think I mentioned it at a previous meeting, I believe that we are well-staffed with mental health professionals in this district. I don't see the need to add, and our mental health professionals are quite skillful with regard to working with children. We're already talking about and looking at pacing guides to be adjusted for next year. But again, those are difficult things to do, not knowing the present level of performance that kids show up with. And it will certainly depend upon, you know, whether we're coming back in June or whether this is going to September. But those are all things that we're thinking about. No solid plans are in place at this point, though.
I think one of the things as you start to think about that is to recognize the fact that when the children do come back, whether it's in a month or in September, as a school, we're going to need to allot that time to teach them how to socialize again. Many of the children have been locked in their homes and really have not had any socialization skills at all. It's going to take us adults some time to reacquaint ourselves with socialization. And for children, it's going to be harder because they haven't had the year's experience. Whether they're a first grader that is just learning it, or they're a 10th grader who has socialized before, but now it comes in with a wave of emotions. I think the idea of teaching the children and really giving them time to review and educate them on socialization is going to be key because they are not going to have done it.
Good point.
So, can we just circle back again to when we have the student identified, you know, that they are connected? Can you explain to me, Dr. Joy, one more time, what were the ways that you would connect them? once you know who they are?
Once we know who they are, and if we're unable to reach out to them by telephone, we'll be sending someone to the home to connect. And once we have that connection, we will attempt to help and support them getting connected if they're not connected, whether it's through working them through Altice or providing them a device. And if none of those options are workable, then we would set up hard copy material to be delivered and picked up, so that we're reaching every single child in one way or another.
Have you looked into or explored any other options in regards to the internet or?
Well, we've talked about extending internet service at our buildings. I know the library, South Country Library, has done that. I think Patrick shared with me on Monday that they noticed a couple of people in the parking lot utilizing it. However, it was the first week. I'm going to follow up with Patrick this Monday at our network meeting again. But I honestly, I don't see the unconnected showing up to the school parking lot to log in and do schoolwork. I think it might be a nice thing for a local library to do, but I don't know if it's going to work for us. We are exploring the hotspot devices, which should be available mid-May. Those are rather expensive. It'd be nice if we had a device that had a range that we could place in a neighborhood, but those devices don't exist. But then again, looking at how many kids we need to deal with and or how many families we need to deal with, we'll be looking at all options.
So, Dr. Gianna, just to recap, for those parents who are listening, hopefully, you're saying that for the kids who don't have internet, who don't have iPad or whatnot, that there are Chromebooks available for those who need.
Correct.
Number two, there are areas such as this high school, such as the library, where they could go and in the parking lot, there is internet access and they can do their homework there.
Currently, only South Country Library has that.
Right, South Country Library. Number three, which is,
Hotspot.
number three, that the schools will begin to reach out to each family.
Yes.
They will contact, they will contact the schools, they will contact the parents, they will try to reach the kids, and then eventually there will be a knock on the door.
Yes.
And number four is that there is either a virtual learning process or even paper process. Is that correct?
Yes,
So
that's
that's
correct.
for everyone who's listening who had questions. So hopefully you're listening and you'll zero into those things, please.
And if you're listening, you're probably connected.
That's the point.
Mr.
Well,
Mancini?
But
You have friends and neighbors and relatives who are not connected.
Okay, true.
I just want to make a point, Dr. Gianni, correct me if I'm wrong, because Mr. Parker's comments you just made, we're going to begin to reach out. It's my impression from my conversation, we have been reaching out.
Yes.
We just have a more formalized process to do so now.
Correct.
Because I personally have been called by, some staff members who are trying to reach students that I know, that I work with, that I coach in basketball, whatever else it is, who have difficult backgrounds and situations that's concerned about connectivity. So I think it needs to be clear that there is an effort to reach everybody. And again, I know many teachers who, if their students aren't checking in, they're making calls and everything else. It's just a bit more of an effort and a more formalized effort. Is that accurate?
Well, I don't think there was any moment that we were saying that teachers were not reaching out to some of the students.
Okay, I get that. I just want to make sure you don't get that
My point is
impression.
very clear. I want to make sure that everyone is having opportunities to learn if that possibility is there.
Sure, and I agree with that. I guess the next question I have is, do we know if there are any portions of our community that Altice or any other provider can't reach, right? This little area, this little square radius, we don't know that, right?
No, I don't know that.
It seems unlikely, but if we did, that would be something that we should probably try to find out.
And I
If they
think,
say, hey, listen, this radius, we're just never gonna get service in there for whatever reason.
and I think once we make those personal connections with staff supporting and helping with Altice, we'll be able to figure that out. Okay, anything else on remote learning? So very quickly, our meals program continues to distribute to students in the district with siblings under 18 years of age. We distribute about 1,000 or just over 1,000 meals per day and 4,000 on Friday. The Friday distribution, of course, is for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Through our work with the Leadership Network, we've identified the availability of food for those in need in several places. On Tuesday and Thursday, St. Joe the Worker pantry is open 11 to 12. On Wednesday and Friday, Mary Immaculate, 10 to 11. And on Friday, Bellport Country Club at 12:30. And in addition, on Saturday, Lighthouse Mission distributes food backed by Help Suffolk from 12 to 1. And that has been compiled through our Leadership Network. Child care, I've mentioned to the board that we've arranged for the free child care for children K to 6, for healthcare providers and emergency responders. Scope is providing that service in any of 15 locations. At this point in time, no families are currently utilizing the service from our community. And that is all the update I have for you this evening. I don't know if Ms. Hayes or anyone else has any update.
Congratulations on the last food drive. I hear it was quite successful.
Oh, Compass Unity had a real successful food drive this past weekend. They conducted the food drive and donated the food to Angels of Long Island and Lighthouse Mission. If you were tuned in to News 12 today, you would have seen that Angels of Long Island was doing their grab and go with, and I'm sure a lot of that food was sitting there, and it was a tremendous amount of bags there. So yeah, it was. I spoke with Ms. Verno, and actually she shared at the leadership meeting that the community was overwhelmingly supportive on Saturday. The line just was out the parking lot with regard to folks showing up with donations of food, checks, money, all sorts of stuff for the community, so it was great.
I think it's also a good time, I was gonna wait until later though, to thank that company that did the, I'm actually wearing my South Country Strong t-shirt from Heart and Soul, who the proceeds from the sale went to Lighthouse Mission so that they could procure some more food for those in need. So I think it was from what I understand, it was very successful. It sounds like they sold a lot of shirts, which was great. So thanks to those guys. They're Bellport High School alumni.
Yes.
Is it too late to get those shirts?
I don't know. I saw it on Facebook, and I don't know if they're going to do another one. I know they did this run. I mean, you ordered it, you got it in a week. They were quick. They were great. A week and a half, whatever it was. Somebody dropped it off at my house. So I don't know the answer to that. I don't really know them personally. I know they support the basketball program with shirts and things like that throughout the year. So.
Cameron, I know that they did mention that they had ordered a couple of extras. So it's definitely, and I know that the vendor that they used was East End, which is a vendor that's right here in Mastic. Actually, it's a family of ours here in the district. So I would definitely reach out to them. And I know that I'm sure that they would do it again, if not, because I went up Saturday morning to pick it up and there was boxes upon boxes. So definitely reach out.
Do we have any reports from trustees about anything?
We will be having our advisory committees starting up at the next one, virtually if need be, so the board will have the opportunity to report. My apologies.
Okay,
Okay.
and we'll get, I guess, an updated calendar showing when those advisory
Well,
committees.
we're just gonna continue, we're gonna start with the next one. I think, I'm not sure what they are on the calendar.
June 3rd.
Is it June? Unless, of course, we come back, well, if we come back sooner. If we come back sooner, then we'll kick one off,
Okay.
okay? That's
All
all I
right.
have.
The next thing is, I think the budget presentation.
Yes, the budget presentation. Whoa, wow, that was fast, okay. Are you all able to see it, access it on your device? Ready? We ready to go? Okay, so our next presentation and only presentation this evening is a review of our expense and revenue, and it is an update. It's our 7th presentation of the school year. So administration went back and took a look at reductions in staff and came up with a couple of more. And I want to point out that these reductions, actually I think it's on the next slide, are not a result of cutting any program. They are simply a result of applying our class size guideline. So you will see an increase, move from 22.1 to 24.6 full-time equivalent positions. That resulted in one additional elementary staff member. Actually a reduction in secondary staff from a projection we had earlier, and the contingent position remains in there. So we're looking at a 24.6 FTE, full-time equivalent reduction in staffing. So this current budget continues to be program-driven. And what I mean by that, we haven't eliminated any programs. Even though we are at a point where we do have some financial concerns, programs are continued to be intact. As I mentioned earlier, elementary class size guidelines are preserved. Our average class sizes, based on these reductions, will range from 17 to 23. They're probably at 15 to 23 now. So it has eliminated those really small class sizes that we've had at the lower levels. There's no change in fine and performing arts or interscholastic athletics, and it continues to support our K-12 intervention programs with no reduction in student support staff. The last presentation, we did have a reduction in guidance that worked with the reflection room at the middle school. In considering kids coming back with greater needs, we thought further on that and felt that that was not a wise decision, and we put that position back. It also contains pre-K transportation. I know the board, pre-K transportation is near and dear to their heart, but it may be a point where we need to start looking at that given the financial crisis that we're in. But currently, the budget does have pre-K transportation in it. So our challenges continue. As I mentioned earlier, transportation, before you saw a $2.7 million increase there. Earlier, I had talked about speaking with the transportation provider in working on the RFP proposal, and we learned that some 24 buses were double budgeted. Okay, we reduced those 24 buses, and that resulted in a $1.7 million decrease in what our projection was. So when you look at transportation, you'll see a $570,000 increase now. Mr. Pacini.
What is the basis for the $1.29 million increase for the BOCES line?
It's a result of increased kids in there, as you.
So that's strictly enrollment in our kids in both these programs?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Our revenue limitations are the tax cap levy at 1.3, foundation aid funding, which quite frankly is not moving or stagnant. A concern on whether there'll be a pandemic adjustment mid-year or sometime during the year. And then, of course, mid-year adjustments and underfunded and unfunded mandates, and our increased and changing student needs.
Now, Dr. Janet,
Yes.
the pandemic adjustment fees, is that a guesstimation or is that
Is what a guesstimation?
the pandemic adjustment?
We don't know where we're gonna be, right? So that's the number that we've gotten, but,
You have to see that number.
yes. Okay, so actually, when you look at your projected revenues, the screen that I have showing, I don't know if it's your slide, so it's slide 5. You'll see these projections have not changed from the last time we met. But the pandemic adjustment is 4 lines down, $991,000. The question remains on whether or not the federal CARES restoration will support that, and that would be a zero effect if it did. But at this point, we do not know. Other state aid, transportation and excess, expense aids, these numbers total $889,000. So basically, that's your increase. It's a rather low increase in state aid for us, which contributes to the problem when your expenses are increasing, but your revenues are not matching those expenses, is why we end up with the gap that we do have now. Oh, and there's that question mark with regard to the pandemic adjustment and federal CARES restoration. So when you take a look at our expenses, again, a big reduction from transportation that we had initially had from a previous presentation. These expenses reflect a 24.6 FTE staffing reduction. Obviously, as we continue to look for efficiencies and make adjustments, these numbers will change. These expenses include transportation increases for year 1 of the 5-year van. If we were to accept the RFP, I want to remind the board, we have not approved or accepted the RFP that we put out for. And also year 2 of our big bus, year 2 of 5 of the big bus contract, which was accepted last year. So our financial challenges, when you take a look at your revenues and your expenses together, we remain with a gap of $8 million, or $8.2 million, and that's the biggest result, or the reduction, is that $1.7 million, and of course the couple of FTE positions that have been reduced. Now, I remind the board that number looks real scary, but in the past we have designated fund balance and appropriated reserves, which I would recommend that we continue to do. The question to how much is something the board is going to need to decide and come to terms with. Where we are next, I've offered some considerations to the board to take a look at. Obviously, I'm not looking for any decisions, but if the board were to eliminate the pre-K transportation, that is about a $550,000 savings. I will tell you that use of transportation at the pre-K is about 80%. So a lot of families are using it. However, it is not required, so it is something the board needs to consider. Another consideration in cost savings is to to reduce the budget by another 3 FTE positions, and to do that, you could have our UPK teachers move back into the K-2 and allow the community-based organizations to deliver the UPK program altogether. That's a significant savings because obviously the CBOs pay much less money than we are required to pay. That's something to consider. Another consideration is to continue increasing class sizes. I believe we can probably save another 2 positions in the elementary and still not go above the guideline, but we will be raising the numbers of those lower ones in the K-2s, and we would probably be able to get 1 or 2 positions out of secondary doing the same thing. That would be a $1 million savings. Then I would ask the board to consider, but not at this time, but so they have this in the back of their mind with regard to closing the gap. Our debt service transfer, we're in this year would be year 4 or 5, which was a plan to give that money back to the community, so I would continue that. We had given back 200 in workers' comp and 200 in ERS last year, and we plan to continue that because those reserves are funded well. And then I would ask the board to consider asking the community to move back the capital money. We've got $3.3 million in capital reserve right now, but I am concerned about pandemic mid-year cuts. If the community approved moving that back, we could put it in the TRS reserve. There, it could help it could be there in the event we do have the mid-year cuts. It will be there to solve the issue that we are projecting down the road with TRS as well, and it would allow us to appropriate more money of that reserve towards this gap. And we believe we can do about $540,000 without having any concerns with our reserves. And then I would suggest a $4 million appropriate fund balance. We're still short, but those are things for the board to consider. Thoughts?
About how much short are we?
I
Taking
might.
into account everything.
If you did all that, I think we're still, I'm sorry, I thought I wrote that down. Can you do that? 1.6. Thank you, Ms. Costa.
Sure, 1.6.
1.6.
I have another question about the UPK transportation.
Yes.
Were you able to determine whether it enabled more children to take advantage of the UPK program than in prior years?
No,
Or
because-
is this just, we haven't had enough time to see how it's gonna work, because it's only been 1 year?
Yeah, you see, because of a declining enrollment, I can't answer that with any degree of certainty. We haven't increased the enrollment. However, you have 80% of the kids using it. The last time we offered it, I think we were at like 35%, right? So significantly more use it. And I think it makes sense. The building's at the end of the district, right?
Right.
So, I mean, that
It is a week up.
who's got a number for pre-K? And 860?
For the grant?
About 160, no, not the total grant. South Haven's about 160. So 80% of that are using it.
Which is significantly more than we had last year.
Oh, yeah, in terms of using the bus, absolutely, absolutely.
Attending pre-K, not just using the bus. And I think there's gotta be a correlation.
I think that,
Just a question about the numbers though, when you said about what it added up to. I mean, if we have 5.5 in the red there and $1 million at the top and then 2.3, doesn't that cover the 8.2 gap?
5 million plus 1 million, right?
Yeah.
Five, what's
She's got
5, and 1?
2.3 million
6, 5, and 2, that's 8,
in the bottom
3,
line.
isn't it?
No, you can't do.
Oh, the 2.3, she's adding.
It's in there, yeah, not the 2.3.
No, only the 5,000,005 and the 1,000,042.
And what's that?
So 5,540 plus 1,042 is 6,582.
6,582,000, so it doesn't add up to the
And
8.
what is it, 8
I
million?
thought you were adding the, what about the 2.3?
No, the 2.3 would be put in the reserve to protect us for any future issues.
Oh,
And
okay.
what I said was we could take 540 of that.
Mm-hmm, okay. Is that what the red asterisk is for, and then just
Yeah.
the black asterisk?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So we were able to make some reductions. The board knows we are working with transportation to see if we could flatten some and make some reductions there as well. I think we're getting closer. Not sure when we're going to know any more on state aid. I'm hopeful we will in 2 weeks, but I'm really not quite certain we will at that time either.
But just one thing, I love the thought of new programs we're adding. I can't see us adding new programs when we're going to need to cut things.
Well, we haven't cut it, okay, cut things as mean the transportation, because we haven't cut any program.
Mhm.
Okay, we haven't cut any program.
Like
We
I
do,
said, but to me, cutting the transportation
yes,
is a huge issue, and it has, I think, long-term future implications when we have a significant number of students who don't go to pre-K. And so I can't see adding a program at the high school, even though I love the program.
okay, you're talking about capstone,
Yeah,
okay,
there are some things that we have to look very seriously at.
okay.
But is Capstone costing us anything if
There's
it's,
additional staff, how many, is there 1 or 2?
One.
It's one full-time equivalent position.
and how many students would be in the program?
I think 62 so far.
62 so far.
How many?
62 so far have requested.
Okay, so if we did not have the capstone, those students would be taking something else.
Correct.
We would have to provide teaching staff and time for
Yeah,
them to be in those classes.
They more than likely would disperse among other courses.
I think just to, I wasn't saying anything about the pre-K thing, and I understand everybody's thoughts process and how the appearances that, I know we have a lot of kids using it because it's on the end of town, but we don't know how if it's a direct correlation to enrollment, because it's still a half-day program, so parents are still home. We don't know of those 80% of kids, how many of those kids can't be driven to school by their families. I'm sure there's some, but it's a lot of money for a luxury right now in the predicament that we're in. That's just my 2 cents on it. When you think about where we need to save and how far away we are, $550,000 to bus, what is it, 100 kids, 110 kids to South Haven while they have parents at home, most of them, seems a little tough for me. And I've always had that objection from day one, so it's no surprise to anybody.
I tend to agree with Chris on that, as much as that it hurts me to see that. It is a lot of money. I know that we have to make tough cuts. I mean, to look at cutting and to increase class size again at the elementary level, when we're talking about implementing a new program at the high school, as wonderful as AP Capstone sounds, and believe me, I would love for my own children to take advantage of that, to increase the class size even more, really is going to be detrimental to our students. We've already given a ton of reasons in the beginning of this board meeting of all of the obstacles that our children are going to face coming in. To increase class size really is even more than what you have projected is something I can't swallow.
other comments, thoughts?
I think we're gonna see a revised list of expenditures and revenues once we know more, hopefully at the end of the week
That's,
with regard.
I'm hopeful of that. I mean, our plan moving forward is to continue to look for efficiencies, take guidance from the board and bring back another budget for you to look at. You know, fortunately, unfortunately, you know, the process is delayed, so we have the time. We would have been well into adoption already and presenting. So fortunately, we do have some time, at least now, and hopefully within the next couple of weeks, that timeline will be narrowed for us. Any other
And
comments?
we're still on target for being able to approve a budget and then present it to the taxpayers at some point after June 1, which I think is what the schedule from the state is right now.
Yeah, I'm gonna let council weigh in. I don't know if we have such specific guidance, but go ahead.
We have no specific guidance. The guidance is that it is extended at least until June 1st. Any of the issues with regard to the manner, location, and mode of doing this election and the budget vote is currently pending decision.
So we have to wait and get more information as things come out of the state at this point.
The budget adoption date is not tied to the election. That's really the only date that's not tied to the election. You can adopt the budget and submit your property tax report card, you know, within the current timelines. All the other dates, including the budget hearing that's listed on the presentation, they're all tied to the date of the election. And we don't know those dates.
We did our report, we posted it, but we didn't.
Can't do it.
So what's the date for the property report card?
So the property tax report card is a date that is at least, I believe at least 24 days prior to the budget. So it's an at least date. So you can do it before the deadline. And so all the other dates are within a certain range between the date of the budget. So those dates aren't set. So the original date was April 26th, I believe. Certainly that date has passed, but there's no set deadline. But you can do it. You can adopt your budget prior to the deadline. That's the question.
Well, at this point, it looks like that'll be in June.
The budget vote and election will be after June 1st. We don't know how it's going to take place. We don't know if it's going to be absentee ballot. We don't know if it's going to be earlier in June to provide the board with an opportunity for a revote before the end of June. All that information is up in the air at this point.
Does anybody have more questions about this? On the budget presentation? Are we ready to go on to,
Consent items?
board consent agenda, I believe would be next?
Yeah, we have a couple. We have no curriculum, but we have personnel and business. I'll put them all together, and you can pull them out or whichever you choose. So administration recommends changes in personnel items H1 and H2, and business items I1 through I4.
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve personnel items H1 through H2? And I'm gonna break that one out.
Okay.
I'm gonna do that separately from the
Okay.
business items.
Okay.
So for H1 and H2, is there a motion to consent to those items? Motion by Mr. Nix, a second by Mr. Trent. Any questions? And I do have a question, and that's on the salaries for, some of these are extra salaries for teachers to cover extra hours, I believe, and they've been previously approved. But the dates that are mentioned look like dates when we have not been in physical session. Are these payments gonna still be made?
Yeah, so teachers are getting paid during remote learning. So if they remote learned and covered for someone, they would be paid contractually.
Okay, and that's what these additional
Yes.
sums apply
Yes,
to?
these are additional assignments. They're 0.2s of coverage.
Okay. Is there no other questions? Are we ready to vote to approve? All in favor? I see all hands raised. So it's unanimously approved. And we will now go to the board consent agenda for business, which was items I1 through 4.
Correct.
Is there a motion to approve those items? Who wants to make the motion? Okay, Ms. DeSanto, and a second by Mr. Nix.
And before the board does speak if they wish, I just want to point out that items 3 and 4 are the bid awards for the Kramer windows and vestibule. We're quite happy that they did come in under budget. So that's fantastic, and we'll leave some money in capital reserve. Also, we do want to get this approved so we can get the order in, because it's our understanding that fabrication is coming out of Jersey and we may be delayed, so we want to get ourselves right to the front of the line on making these windows so we can get them in as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you for the comments. Are there any other questions or discussions on this? Okay, all in favor? Raise your hands. I see all hands raised, so it's unanimously approved.
Okay, and that's all I have, Ms. Hayes.
Okay, everything from the superintendent. Do we have any closing remarks? Anybody? No?
Everyone stay well.
Yes.
There's that. Please do. So I'll need a motion to adjourn, and that's usually Mr. Trent's motion. So he made the motion, and a second by,
Can you do this one?
I need a second by Mr. Nix. So all in favor of adjournment? It's unanimous. Stay well, be
Good
safe.
evening,
Hi, everybody.
Stay well.